It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Switzerland's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at Switzerland's squad for the 2022 World Cup. Short version, please. Player-by-player section. So we're going to move on to a discussion of the squad. And at the top of the podcast, we started with our kind of takeaways from the podcasts that we've done on Switzerland so far. And those were team podcasts. So our first couple of comments were focused more on the team. And I talked about them above, so I'll just kind of remind here. So we noted that they had been fairly fortunate in a lot of their groupings over the years in Euro Cups and in World Cups, but especially in the last 15 or so years. And but we did say, in fairness, that they are starting to challenge top teams, whereas before they were pretty consistent against middling teams, but tended to lose when it came to meeting a top team. And it had been middling teams that they'd met in their groupings, which gave them a bit of an advantage. But now we see them challenging top teams a little bit more. In terms of player notes based on players, we can say they have really too many central players, especially central midfielders, and not enough wide players. So again, particularly true in the midfield. And it's hard to say whether the formation dictates the players or the players that they have dictate the formation. We do see that they don't have a lot of players coded as outside midfielders. And the long and short of this is that it seems to force them into formations that play fairly centrally. So not a lot of wing play by Switzerland. But we'll have to see. I'm not particularly confident in saying that because I'm not familiar enough with their play. But I will be keeping an eye out for it in this World Cup. But certainly in terms of formation, they look fairly central. And finally, we have a very tight squad. We're going to see they don't have a lot of players on the slate kind of coming in and out, but rather stick with a fairly small group. And that group, especially the starters, have been playing together for a long time. So I'm expecting a fairly cohesive squad. I actually think this is the reason why they have been challenging some of the top teams recently. Maybe they don't have the star talent of some of the other big teams in Europe, but they have a cohesion that some of the small teams like Wales have, where the players have been playing together for a long time and basically add up to more than the sum of their parts. So another issue is they don't have a lot of new blood coming in. So they may require some renewal in the years after the Cup. However, this tight squad of players is not that old. I would say late 20s or early 30s. So probably have a few years left in them, maybe one or two tournaments for a lot of these players. Anyway, a very cohesive squad there. And let's move on to talk about their club affiliations. So as I said, kind of lacking in big star power. They do have Manuel Akanji with a big club in Manchester City, but he's not really a starter on that club. So maybe we'll see more of him playing for Man United in the upcoming months and years. We also have Gregor Kobel for Borussia Dortmund, and I believe he's a starting keeper with them. I thought, and Philip Kohn, the starting keeper also, I think, for Red Bull Salzburg. So those two are backup keepers. So the starting keeper, Jan Sommer, plays for a slightly lesser club in Borussia Mönchengladbach. And there are a few of their players playing for slightly lesser clubs in Germany. So Borussia Mönchengladbach and Eintracht Frankfurt. I would say about a third of the squad is plying their trade in Switzerland. And again, the biggest teams there are probably young Basel, probably the biggest team there, and Young Boys, but not all of them play for the biggest teams. There are a couple with some of the smaller teams in Switzerland, like Lugano and St. Gallen, and that. And otherwise, I would say it's kind of second to even third tier teams like Lorient and Montpellier in France, Newcastle and Nottingham Forest in England, and Bologna and Torino in France. We also have Bril and Bolo playing for Monaco. Sorry, Monaco in the French league, and then two players playing for Red Bull Salzburg who are in the Champions League this year. Okay, so that's an overview of their club affiliations. Let's move on to talk about some stats for the club. Some stats. So if you've been listening to other podcasts, you know I'm working on some statistics, and they're pretty rough, but hopefully I'll develop them over time. But one of the stats I have is the total number of candidates on the plate for the teams. And on the graphic here, I have total players called up since 2020, but it should be since 2021. So that kind of gives us an idea of how many players they're dealing with. At the upper end, we have teams like Ecuador, USA, and Mexico, who have around 65 players on their plate. And at the lower end, we have teams like Belgium and Denmark and Argentina, surprisingly, and Wales, who have fewer numbers, around 45. So Switzerland is very low here, kind of confirming the tight squad note that I had above. 43 for Switzerland. So that's, a fairly small number to be dealing with. They may have to, as I said, bring in more players after the Cup and stuff, but it seems to be enough, except for outside midfielders. Maybe they need to add. I wouldn't be surprised if they try out a couple. Well, I might be a bit surprised, because I think that they're just accepting it and kind of going with the more central formation, like the 4-2-3-1 that they favor. Okay, in terms of total players under consideration then, I should just finish with the total number of candidates there. So 43 for Switzerland, and the average is 49.5. So quite a few less candidates on the table than most teams. In terms of candidates kind of under consideration, current consideration, we look at the definite, likely, and possible candidates. So they're the ones really who have been playing recently, and that's 35 for Switzerland, and the average is 33. So actually a bit more than most. We did see a number of possible candidates there. So it seems to be like the players they use fairly regularly, and that's supported by the last one, the total players in the definite and likely category. And surprisingly, they are the highest of all teams with 25. So they've pretty much decided on their World Cup squad here, because they only bring 26 to the Cup. So if they use all of their players in the definite and likely category, they would only have to add one from the possible category. Of course, there may be a couple of players who are injured, a couple of players in good form at the very end, that may change that. But basically, I think this is going to be true, where there won't be any big surprises with Switzerland. We'll see almost all of the definite and likely candidates, and maybe 2 or 3 unexpected candidates. We'll move on to talk about their age, average age. Well, I've been saying 25 to 27 is average. Normally, I think of 27 as being slightly older, but in this World Cup, so far, judging by my stats, 27 is close to average. The average is 26.8. So compared to most teams, no, not a particularly old squad. So as I say, this tight and cohesive squad does seem to have a few years left in its legs. And if we look specifically, their oldest player is 33 years old. So most teams have a couple of players who are older than that. They do have a number of players who are over 30, though. So it's 11 players who are 30 or older, but as we saw, not much older than 30. So early 30s, a good age actually for a balance of experience and still young enough to play. At the other end, they don't have a lot of players who are very young either, just 3 players who are 22 or younger. The biggest of them would be Noah Okafor. The others have kind of barely made their way into the squad, and that's kind of true of all the players who are 24 or younger, apart from Ruben Vargas and Noah Okafor. So age not an issue. I think beginning to see 27 as kind of a good age for a balance of experience and freshness. The average number of caps is 33.1. So actually that is quite a bit below other teams. So they do kind of, no, sorry, it's not, it's above. 29.6 is the average. So again, good experience with the squad, and more experience than the average squad. In terms of goals, they have 128 goals across all of those players. That would be their definite, likely, impossible players. The statistics doesn't mean much in itself until we talk about this statistic, the goals per player. And so I've calculated this into a percentage, and it's 12.1%. So that is a bit low because the average is 13.5%. And the very lowest there is 11.2%. Just 11.0%. Japan and South Korea at 11.6. Those are teams that are notable for kind of having difficulty scoring. So a bit of a problem, I would say, for Switzerland. Needing a few more goals. I'll just kind of finish this by going over the percentages for some of the players. So I said in the podcast that they don't really have a star striker. Actually, Breen Mbolo's percentage is a little low. He is at just 19%, which is not great for a forward. 11 goals in 58 games. Hans Seferovic, the other forward, has a pretty good ratio at 28.4. Not outstanding, but 25 goals in 88 games. As I said, he's never really struck me that much in tournaments. So I would still argue they don't really have a star striker. Actually, Cedric Itim with 4 goals in 7 games is 57%, but we usually don't count. We usually don't look at it unless it's under 20 games because, who was the player with 3 goals in 4 games that we looked at during players? I can't find him here, but he's not going to keep up a 75% ratio like that. So again, Steven Zuber is also 19%, which is not bad for a right attacking midfielder. And Xherdan Shaqiri is actually probably their main scorer with 26 goals in 108 games. So he's at 24%, which is quite good for a midfielder. But, a star striker is usually, it should be around 30%, I would say. And they do get kind of goals from all over the field, but I maintain that they're not a high scoring team and could benefit from finding a star striker or someone to put the ball in the goal more reliably. Okay, let's move on to players and issues to watch. So actually not a lot with Switzerland. These are kind of minor quibbles. So in central defense, is it unsettled or is it a rotation? We saw actually that it was quite settled in the early part of the period in the cup. with Akanji and Elvedi and Shaw kind of rotating. But then we saw central midfielder Frey come into the fray, and Comert also a little bit. So by the end, for the Nations League games, we kind of had those 5 players rotating, which seems a bit too confusing. However, we have seen that teams are kind of rotating players more than in the past, when they had just 2 starters starting every game, and that may be what they're doing here. They certainly don't lack the personnel, but I wonder if it's a bit unsettled, or whether that's a strategy. Also, in terms of the overall formation, I don't know why I put this in defense actually, but maybe because they started with a 3-man defense for 4 games in the Euro Cup, and then went to a 4-man backline. Then they stuck with the 4-man backline. But in terms of the midfield and other formations, they were pretty reliably using a 4-2-1-3. And then in the 4 Nations League games in June, tried out 2 formations besides, a 4-4-2 and a 4-3-3. So that was a bit confusing. And I wonder if it's wise to kind of make a lot of changes when they don't have a lot of games before the Cup to get used to those changes. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in September here. In the central midfield, we did notice that they really have too many central midfielders. But then we saw it's those central midfielders who kind of play out wide, although they don't use a lot of wide players. So when it was a 2-man midfielder, it was shared by Freuler and Zacher, and then sometimes Zachariah coming in as the 3rd man, but more recently Idrissa Sow taking that role. So again here, a steady cast, but a bit of rotation, making us wonder again if that's kind of a strategic rotation, or just indecision about who the real starters are. Again, these are kind of minor quibbles. Probably one of the more major quibbles is few wingers, which forces them to play more centrally. I've talked about that above. And not enough midfield candidates in general. In a lot of the positions, we only had 1 player there, so they could use a few more. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried a couple out in the upcoming games. But again, maybe kind of too late to introduce new players, so they'll probably just go with their more central players. And certainly they have enough to bring to the Cup. Just I wonder if there are injuries and stuff, whether they really have enough to back that up. Finally, in attack, following on to what I said above, more goals, please. I'll leave it at that. A little thin on scoring. Don't really have a star striker, but they seem to get by. Okay, let's move on and talk about new injured and notable absences. And I've actually decided to limit this to basically definite or likely players, unless there is a possible player who seems kind of significant, in other words, has been on the field, during our player-by-player discussion, for example. So actually, Switzerland don't have that many, but significantly, we have Yakin Murat, the manager. He is new to the team since 2021, so we'll look at the outgoing manager in the notable absences section. And the only other player who we have as a definite candidate, though not a starter, is Michel Aebischer. So a kind of a central midfielder he's coded at, and has only played a couple of games as a left or right defensive kind of midfielder. He is new to the squad. And up front, we have Noah Okafor, who we consider a likely candidate. He's worked his way into the squad, and he's just 22 years old. And finally, we have goalkeeper Philip Cohn, who is just a possible candidate, but yeah, and he might not make it to the cup, but he does seem to be the starting keeper for Red Bull Salzburg, who will be playing in the Champions League. So I wonder if he'll kind of move up in the pecking order. Mind you, he has got pretty stiff competition in front of him there. And that's it. I mean, some of the possible players are new, but they haven't really broken into the squad in terms of a starting position. And once again, testament to how tight and cohesive the squad are. As I said, they've been playing together for quite a while, so not easy to break into that squad. These players will come through more when that squad starts to retire, I suppose. In terms of injuries, not a big problem for Switzerland. Gregor Kobel, the goalkeeper, who's the, I believe, the starting keeper for Borussia Dortmund there, is injured. He's out with a torn muscle fiber, and I'm not sure when that happened exactly, but he was out for a few September games with his club there. But he's expected to be back before the World Cup. So I don't think that's going to be a big problem, although torn muscle fiber doesn't sound too good. We also mentioned in the play-by-play podcast Matteo Botani, kind of a bench player who's just a possible candidate. And he was injured for the games in June 2022, but I see that he's back playing for his club over the summer. So not a problem there. All right, so all that's left here is the notable absences. So kind of converse to Yakin Murat being the new manager, the outgoing manager, Vladimir Petkovic, managed them through the Euro 2016, World Cup 2018, and Euro 2020, where they passed the group stage every time, even beating France in the round of 16 of Euro 2020 to reach the quarterfinals. So was a good manager for them, but now has made way for Murat Yakin. We have Valon Behrami, who we introduced in the play-by-player, a central midfielder with 83 caps. He actually retired before the Euro, last appeared in the World Cup 2018. But we are going back a little bit here because there are some fans who follow the team kind of from World Cup to World Cup. So they may remember him from the 2018 World Cup. Stefan Lichtensteiner, the right back, who was with the team from 2006 to 19 and had 108 caps. He was the captain. He also wasn't around for the Euro 2020, but was the captain and starter in the 2018 World Cup and prior. Blerem Dusmaili, central midfielder who was a starter in the 2018 World Cup and 2016 Euro Cup. Also didn't make it to the Euro 2020, so just a player that some will remember from the World Cup. I was almost introducing this guy in the player-by-player podcast, Admir Mehmedi, and despite his 76 caps, never kind of really worked his way into the team, just the Euro 2016 where he was a starter. But he was around from 2011 to 21 and was kind of a substitute in the in the 2014 World Cup. He was injured for the 2018 Cup, but was also a substitute in Euro 2020. Just a familiar name, I guess. Johan Juru, 76 caps and was with the team from 2006 to 2018. Again, not necessarily a starter all the way, but he was in the 2014 World Cup and 2016 Euro Cup. And his last tournament was the 2018 World Cup. And finally, Joseph Durmich went off in search of an extra vowel for his name. He was actually never really integrated fully into the squad, was a starter in the 2014 World Cup and just a substitute in the 2018 World Cup, but was a player they kind of relied on for goals. And he did actually have a scoring percentage of over 33%. So they perhaps miss him in terms of goals, though he was never fully integrated into the squad. So all of those players listed in grey, meaning that they are retired, a darker grey, and players who have never played in a tournament listed in lighter grey. There, like the new ones that we introduced there. And this is only relevant for YouTube watchers, so I'll stop yammering on about it. And we're going to finish with the predicted starters. So we'll just run through the squad quickly again, and basically name the most of the major players and the ones who we think are going to start. So Vladimir Petkovic, the manager, is out. So I'll put him in red there, and in red. Highlights, yikes. And Murat Yakin is in. So we'll call Murat Yakin a starter because he's the one who will take them through the cup. In terms of goalkeepers, we have definite candidates Jan Sommer and Jonas Omlin, and likely candidate Gregor Kobel. And I'll mention Philip Cohn as a possible candidate because I wouldn't be shocked to see him move into make the squad. But anyway, Jan Sommer is the clear starter there, at least for the time being. I think the others will take over probably after the cup, I'm guessing. In terms of central defenders, we have kind of a rotation at the back there, and actually the most consistent starters have been Manuel Akanji and Nico Elvedi, although I do think it'll be a bit of a rotation, and I think Fabian Schär will get a couple of starts there, especially if they go deeper into the tournament. So that's where I stand on that one. The other candidate we have is Ire Komert as a definite candidate, actually, but not as a starter. He's been called up to the squad, but hasn't actually earned that many starts. As a left back, there's really no one other than Ricardo Rodriguez. And Ulises Garcia, who came back after a 4-year absence, is a likely candidate, but really hasn't earned any starts and is certainly not challenging Ricardo Rodriguez for the position. In fact, when Rodriguez is out, it's a right back who comes in to replace him. So Ulises Garcia a bit far from the starting lineup there. And those right backs are definite candidate Sylvain Widmer and possible candidates Kevin Mbabu and Jordan Latomba. I wouldn't be surprised if all three of them made it. And in fact, despite Mbabu being just a possible candidate, I think he missed a few of the last games. They have been rotating the position all the way since the Euro Cup. So I think that will continue and both of them will get starts. But I would nod Sylvain Widmer as a slightly more likely there. Defensive midfielders, we have quite a few. Possible candidate Denny Zakaria does see some field time. And we have definite central midfielders Remo Freuler, Granit Xhaka and Djibril Sow, as well as likely candidate Fabian Frau. So I'm going to actually nominate all three of those central midfielders as starters. Because some of them will play kind of a left midfielder, right midfielder. Xhaka may be a bit more an advanced role. I think they like to have them on the field. And Djibril Sow is a bit versatile, sometimes even playing in positions outside of the centre midfield there. So, yes, that's that. And defensive midfielders, they don't really use the position, nor do they use the position of left winger that much, although Ruben Vargas does play as a left winger or a left attacking midfielder. So I'm going to use my hedging color and say that Ruben Vargas will get some starts. But a bit of a rotation there with Steven Zuber. I think Steven Zuber, the left attacking midfielder, is more likely than Vargas to be a starter. But I'll kind of put those two in a rotation because I think both of them will get starts. Not so much on the right side, where I think Renato Stefan is a starter, and there's not a real challenge to his position unless it comes from one of the forwards, actually. So Renato Stefan, a definite candidate who I think will make it. Attacking midfielders, we have Xherdan Shaqiri as a likely starter, and I really only put him down to likely because, well, he didn't start all the games, but he's also with Chicago Fire in the USA, and I just feel like the Europeans are a bit Eurocentric that way, and they lose respect for players when they go to play abroad in other continents. So I hope that doesn't happen, and maybe Shaqiri will blast through that. I do see him as a starter here because he's one of their top scorers. So they'll find room for him probably as a central attacking midfielder. Really, no other strong candidates in that position, just players who have been on the bench. As forwards go, we have Breel Embolo as a definite, and Haris Seferovic, Mario Gavranovic, and Noah Okafor as likely. And what will I say here? I'd say Seferovic, he got injured for a while, so he kind of dropped off. He was the starter before that, but I don't know if he's going to come back into a starting position. So without getting into too much discussion, I'm gonna hedge and nominate them all as sometimes starters. Actually, not Gavranovic. I think Okafor will be ahead of Grafanovic in the starting order. So I think, but I really do think all of them will get some starts. And if I had to nominate a starter, I'd probably go with Seferovic there. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. So keep in mind that we'll be doing an update as soon as new information comes out, and that will probably be in early November when the teams will be publishing squad lists. So I won't repeat our address. I'll just say check the show notes if you want to, all the information you need. We've been improving that, and there are links to our websites and previous podcast series. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.